My brother and sister took the house and money from Grandma's estate, but left me the parrot that made me rich. You know how some people say life comes at you fast? Well, mine came at me with a parrot and a mystery that would make Dan Brown jealous. My siblings Tom and Belinda have always been the optimization experts of our family. That May morning in 2025, while they were hauling away every piece of family treasure from Grandma Ellen's house, like they were clearing out a museum gift shop, I stood there holding a cage. Inside sat Rudy, a grumpy, slightly beat-up macaw, who looked about as thrilled to be there as I felt. The whole scene was almost poetic in its absurdity. There I was, Kevin, the 45-year-old optimized employee who'd been downsized 3 months earlier, clutching a birdcage while my brother loaded an antique safe into his pickup truck. Belinda was carefully wrapping what looked like every piece of silver cutlery known to mankind. Meanwhile, I got the pet, and his weird, old-fashioned wooden stand that looked like it belonged in a Victorian mansion. I couldn't help but think this was Grandma Ellen's final lesson. She always had this way of teaching us things without actually telling us what she was teaching, like when she'd make us work in her garden, claiming it was about vegetables, but really showing us patience and persistence. This felt similar, except instead of tomatoes, I got a talking bird who seemed to judge every word I said. The will reading had happened on May 2nd, 2024. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, spoke each phrase with the gravity of someone announcing the winner of the Super Bowl. Tom got the house, the bank accounts, everything you could measure in square footage and zeros. Belinda, our family's self-appointed financial wizard, walked away with AT&T stocks and bonds that she was probably already calculating the tax implications for in her head. Then came my turn. The room went quiet except for the sound of papers rustling. Henderson cleared his throat with the kind of dramatic pause that makes you think something important is coming. Instead, he announced that Ellen Margaret Thompson had left her beloved grandson, Kevin the family parrot Rudy, and all his belongings. The snicker that rippled through the room was barely audible, but I felt it like a punch to the gut. Tom actually patted my shoulder. "Hey, at least you got something that talks back," he said with that forced chuckle people use when they're trying to be nice about bad news. Belinda was more direct. "Kevin, honey, you know we can help you find a good home for Bird if you can't keep him." "Thanks, but I think I'll manage," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Henderson handed me a set of keys and reminded me I had 48 hours to collect the bird and his furniture before the house went on the market. As I signed the paperwork, I remembered something Grandma Ellen used to say: "Sometimes the most valuable things hide in plain sight, if you know where to look." At the time, I figured she meant I should appreciate the simple things in life. You know, the typical grandmotherly wisdom about finding joy in sunsets and home-cooked meals. I had no idea she was being completely literal. The next morning, I returned to Grandma's house with the keys Henderson had given me. The realtor, a woman in her 50s who kept checking her phone, was already there staging the place for potential buyers. "You're the grandson of the bird, right?" she asked, barely looking up from her clipboard. "Just grab what you need and lock up when you're done. I've got 3 showings this afternoon." The house already felt hollow, stripped of most of its personality by my siblings' efficiency. I found Rudy in the sunroom, sitting quietly in his cage like he was waiting for me. The wooden stand was exactly as I remember from childhood visits, except now it looked enormous in the empty room. I started to disassemble the stand for transport, but something felt off. This thing had been in Grandma's house for as long as I could remember, solid as a rock. But now, as I lifted it, the weight distribution seemed wrong. One side was definitely heavier than the other. "You planning to take the floorboards too?" the realtor called from the hallway, her voice carrying that special brand of irritation reserved for people who are disrupting her schedule. "Just the bird furniture," I called back, running my hands along the stand surface. That's when I felt it, a small section that gave slightly under pressure. My curiosity got the better of me. I remembered Grandma mentioning once that the stand had been handmade by her grandfather, a carpenter who knew how to hide things in plain sight. I'd always thought she was talking about the craftsmanship, not actual hiding places. It took me about 20 minutes of gentle prying and some creative problem-solving, but eventually, a hidden compartment revealed itself. Inside was a small black device and a yellowed envelope with my name written in Grandma Ellen's careful handwriting. The note inside was brief. Rudy knows more than he seems. Trust the bird. Question everything else. The real inheritance requires patience and attention. Love, Grandma Ellen. I stared at the device in my palm. It was heavier than a regular flash drive, with a small screen and buttons. I'd never seen anything like it before, but something about its design suggested it was important. The kind of thing you don't just throw in a junk drawer. Find everything you need? The realtor was suddenly standing in the doorway, clearly ready for me to leave. Yeah, just about done, I said, quickly pocketing the device and reassembling the stand. Back at my apartment, I set up Rudy's cage in the living room and let him out to explore. He immediately started flying around the space, occasionally landing on furniture, and making what I can only describe as conversational noises. That's when I started paying attention to what he was actually saying. Most parrots just repeat random phrases or mimic sound they hear on TV. But Rudy was different. He kept repeating specific words in English, always the same ones, but in different orders. Friendship, garden, mountain, river, apple, house, ocean, fortune. At first, I thought he was just cycling through his vocabulary. But after listening for an hour, I realized he was consistently repeating exactly 24 words. Not 23, not 25. Always 24. And while the order changed, the words themselves never did. Something about that number nagged at me. 24 seemed oddly specific for a parrot's vocabulary. I grabbed my laptop and Googled 24 words on a whim, not really expecting to find anything relevant. The search results made my blood run cold. Page after page of articles about cryptocurrency, blockchain wallets, and something called mnemonic seed phrases. According to what I was reading, a seed phrase is essentially a master key to digital wallets that can contain cryptocurrencies. The standard format uses exactly 24 words from a predetermined list. I looked at Rudy, who was now perched on my coffee table, occasionally muttering mountain and chocolate like he was discussing the weather. Could my grandmother really have trained a parrot to memorize a cryptocurrency password? It sounded insane. But then again, everything about the past 48 hours had been insane. The implications started hitting me like a freight train. If Grandma Ellen had somehow stored cryptocurrency somewhere, and if Rudy really did have some kind of password memorized, then I wasn't just inheriting a pet. I was inheriting a living, breathing password, potentially life-changing money. But that raised about 1,000 more questions. When did my grandmother learn about cryptocurrency? How did she get involved with it? And how on earth did she train a parrot to memorize a 24-word sequence? I spent the next few hours spiraling into a rabbit hole of crypto inheritance stories, security forums, and increasingly absurd Reddit theories. People had engraved passwords on metal plates, split them between multiple safe deposit boxes, even tattooed them on their bodies. But a parrot? That was either brilliant or completely insane. Grandma insane. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like something she would do. She'd never trusted banks completely, not since the savings and loan crisis back in the 1980s. She was always talking about keeping your most important assets close to home but safe from prying eyes. What could be closer to home than a pet who lived in your house for decades? What could be safer from prying eyes than a password that only existed in the mind of a bird whom most people would dismiss as just a noisy pet? I looked at Rudy again, who was now preening his feathers with the casual air of someone who might be sitting on a fortune. "All right, buddy," I said out loud, feeling slightly ridiculous. "If you really are worth more than my siblings' entire inheritance combined, we need to figure out how to prove it." The bird looked at me with one bright eye and clearly pronounced the word victory. That's when I realized I might not be going crazy after all. My grandmother had left me something far more valuable than a pet. She'd left me a puzzle that could change everything, wrapped in feathers and packaged with the kind of old-fashioned wisdom that only someone who'd lived through the Great Depression would think to use. The black device sat on my kitchen counter, waiting, but without knowing the exact sequence of Rudy's 24 words. It was just an expensive paperweight. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down every word I heard Rudy say, trying to figure out if there was a pattern. Friendship, garden, mountain, river, apple, house, ocean, fortune, liberty, kitchen, surprise, comfort, chocolate, victory. The list went on, but getting them in the right order was going to be the challenge of my life. As I sat there listening to my inherited squawk financial terminology he shouldn't even understand, I couldn't help but laugh. Here I was, a recently unemployed middle-aged guy, trying to crack a code that was stored in the brain of a bird who seemed to judge my life choices. But if there's one thing I learned from Grandma Ellen, it's that the most valuable lessons often come from the most unexpected teachers. Even if that teacher happens to be a sarcastic parrot with vocabulary that might unlock more money than most people see in a lifetime, the next morning would bring answers. Or at least, it would bring the beginning of the most bizarre education of my life. I just had to figure out how to get a bird to reveal a secret that could change everything. How hard could that be? So there I was, a 45-year-old guy who'd spent his career dealing with tax returns and spreadsheets, suddenly turned into a parrot trainer. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with a clicker and a bag of almonds, try to teach a bird to properly pronounce what might be cryptocurrency passwords, I would have recommended therapy. But here's the thing about desperate times. They make you do things that would normally seem completely insane. The first few days were like trying to teach calculus to a toddler who only spoke in riddles. Rudy could clearly say all 24 words, but only 18 of them came out clearly enough to be useful. The other 6 sounded like he was speaking through a mouth full of peanut butter. I'd sit there for hours, holding up treats. Friendship, Rudy. Friendship. Not friendship, not friendship. Friendship. He'd cock his head, give me a look that screamed, "You're an idiot," and then squawk something that sounded vaguely like what I wanted but not quite right. The breakthrough came when I remembered something my high school basketball coach used to say. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So I started treating this like athletic training. Every clear pronunciation got an almond. Every mumbled word got nothing. Rudy caught on fast. Too fast, actually. Within a week, he was gaming the system, deliberately mispronouncing words just to mess with me, then saying them perfectly when he wanted his reward. But I noticed something interesting. He always started with the word friendship. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but after 3 days of the same pattern, I started paying attention. That's when I decided to do some research on whether any of this was actually possible. I mean, could a parrot really memorize and retain a 24-word cryptocurrency seed phrase for years? I called a local pet store, figuring the guy who sold bird food might know something about parrot intelligence. African grays are basically feathered Einstein. Rick from Feathers and Friends told me. I had one customer whose bird could recite entire episodes of Jeopardy! Another one learned his owner's credit card number and kept saying it to telemarketers. But Rick's stories were nothing compared to what I found online. These birds don't just mimic sounds. They actually understand context and can recall specific information with incredible accuracy. There were documented cases of parrots testifying in court cases, remembering conversations word for word months after hearing them. Parrot witness helps convict killer. Read like something from a supermarket tabloid, but it was from the Detroit Free Press. A macaw had repeated the victim's last words during a domestic violence case, helping prosecutors secure a conviction. Suddenly, Grandma Ellen's plan didn't seem so crazy after all. She'd always been fascinated by animal intelligence. I remembered her telling me once that Rudy was smarter than most people she knew, and at the time, I thought she was just being one of those pet owners who attribute human qualities to their animals. Now I was starting to think she might have been right. Rudy wasn't just a pet. He was a living, breathing, flying hard drive with an attitude problem and a penchant for sarcasm. The real challenge was figuring out the missing words. I had 18 clear ones, but I needed all 24 in the correct sequence. I started thinking about Grandma Ellen's habits, her favorite phrases, the things she said every day without thinking about it. She was a creature of routine. Every morning, she'd greet Rudy with the same cheerful, "Good morning, sunshine." Every time she fed him, she'd ask, "Are you hungry, my beautiful boy?" And every evening, she'd tell him about her day while she made dinner. I started experimenting with these daily rituals, but it was harder than I expected. "Good morning, sunshine," I said to Rudy one morning, and he just stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. It took me 4 days of trying different approaches before I stumbled onto something. I was complaining about my empty fridge when I muttered, "Guess I should check the kitchen for something to eat." And Rudy immediately squawked, "Kitchen!" Clear as day. That was word number 19. The next breakthrough came during what I started calling memory lane sessions. I'd sit with Rudy and talk about Grandma Ellen, sharing stories and memories, hoping to trigger something in his bird brain. "Remember how Grandma used to say that life was full of surprises?" I said one afternoon, and Rudy immediately perked up. "Surprise," he squawked. Word number 20. The pieces are coming together, but slowly. Finding the remaining words was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle in the dark. I tried everything I could think of. I played Grandma's favorite songs, cooked her recipes, even wore her old apron thinking it might trigger some memory. The breakthrough came when I was making hot chocolate one evening, thinking about how Grandma used to make it for me when I was sick. She always said chocolate was the best comfort food. I muttered to myself, "Chocolate." Rudy squawked, followed immediately by comfort. Words 21 and 22. 2 more to go, but they were playing hard to get. I was starting to doubt myself again. Maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't there. Maybe Rudy was just a talkative bird with a good vocabulary, and I was the guy who'd lost his mind trying to find treasure in a pet store purchase. The self-doubt was eating at me. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering if I completely lost touch with reality. I started having conversations with myself that would have made a psychiatrist rich. "Kevin, you're chasing shadows. This is a bird, not a bank vault." But then I remember the hidden compartment, the mysterious device, the note that said, "Rudy knows more than he seems." Grandma Ellen had never been one for practical jokes. Everything she did had a purpose, even if that purpose wasn't immediately obvious. She used to say, "Finish what you start, Kevin. That's how you know you're really living." The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening, when I was feeling particularly defeated. I'd been trying for 2 weeks to get those last words, and I was ready to give up. I thought about calling Tom, admitting that their weird brother had finally cracked under the pressure. Instead, I turned on Grandma's old radio, the one she kept in the kitchen for 40 years. It was tuned to the same oldie station she'd always listened to, and the first song that came on was Elvis Presley's "Suspicious Minds." I wasn't really paying attention to the music at first. I was too busy feeling sorry for myself and questioning every decision I'd made since the will reading. But then I noticed Rudy getting agitated. He was bobbing his head, moving back and forth on his perch like he was dancing. Then, right in the middle of Elvis singing about suspicious minds, Rudy suddenly flew over to me, landed on my shoulder, and looked me straight in the eye. "Victory," he said, as clear as a bell, word number 23. But I still needed one more. I grabbed my notebook and started going through everything again, looking for patterns I might have missed. That's when I saw it in my notes. Rudy had always started with friendship, and now he'd ended with victory. It wasn't random at all. I looked at the sequence I'd been building. Friendship, garden, mountain, river, apple, house, ocean, fortune, liberty, kitchen, surprise, comfort, chocolate, victory. But there was still one word missing. Something that would complete the pattern. Then I remembered something Grandma Ellen used to say when she was working in her garden. Every seed needs water to grow. She'd said it so often it had become background noise, but now it seemed important. "Water, Rudy." I said, "Hopefully." "Water." He tilted his head, considered for a moment, then clearly said, "Water." Word number 24. I had them all. But having all the words was only half the battle. I still needed to figure out the correct sequence. I spent the next hour trying different combinations, writing sequences on paper, crossing them out, trying again. Then I realized something. The sequence wasn't random. It was a story. When I read it in the order Rudy had originally been saying them, it almost sounded like poetry. Like Grandma Ellen had chosen words that meant something to her, arranged in a way that told the story of her life. I downloaded the official Ledger software and read through the setup instructions twice. The device would give me only a few attempts to enter the correct seed phrase before it locked permanently. One mistake could mean losing everything forever. I looked at Rudy, who was now preening himself with the casual air of someone who just solved a major puzzle. "You clever bird," I said. "You've been trying to tell me this whole time, haven't you?" He looked at me with one bright eye and made a sound that I swear was a chuckle. The mysterious black device was still sitting on my kitchen counter, waiting. I'd waited, afraid one mistake might erase everything. But now, with all 24 words in what I hope was a correct sequence, I felt ready. Or as ready as someone can feel when they're about to find out if their inheritance is a fortune or fantasy. I picked up the device, definitely a Ledger hardware wallet, and noted again how substantial it felt in my hand. The small screen came to life when I pressed the power button, showing a simple interface asking for a recovery phrase. This was it, the moment of truth. Either I was about to discover that my grandmother was a crypto genius who'd hidden a fortune in plain sight, or I was about to confirm that I'd spent 3 weeks losing my mind over an elaborate delusion. I took a deep breath and started entering the words in the sequence I'd figured out. Each word appeared on the screen as I typed it, and I double-checked every spelling, every letter, knowing that one mistake could lock me out forever. Friendship, garden, mountain, river, apple, house, ocean, fortune, liberty, kitchen, surprise, comfort, chocolate, water, victory. 24 words. The complete sequence. My hands were shaking as I hit enter. The screen went blank for a moment that felt like an eternity. My heart stopped. Then, slowly, numbers began to appear on the display. Big numbers. The kind of numbers that make you question whether you're reading them correctly. But that's a story for tomorrow. Because right now, sitting in my apartment at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, staring at a screen that had just changed my life forever, I can tell you one thing for certain. Turns out, the smartest voice in the room wasn't mine. It had feathers, sass, and a memory worth millions. July 5th, 2024, the day everything changed. That Saturday evening, when I finally hit enter on those 24 words, I thought I was prepared for whatever might happen. I was wrong. The screen went dark for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, numbers began to appear. Big numbers. The kind that make you question your eyesight, your sanity, and everything you thought you knew about your quiet grandmother. 300 Bitcoin at $112,000 each. 3,800 Ethereum at $2,600 each. Total value, $43,480,000. I stared at that screen for maybe 10 minutes, convinced I was hallucinating. Rudy was perched on my shoulder, completely unbothered by the fact that he just helped me unlock more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. He actually yawned, like revealing multi-million-dollar fortunes was just another Tuesday night activity. I looked at him, then back at the screen, then at him again. "Rudy, buddy, are you seeing this? Or have I finally lost my mind completely?" He tilted his head and clearly said fortune, like he'd been trying to tell me all along. The reality hit me in waves. One moment I was Kevin, the recently unemployed guy worried about making next month's rent. The next moment I was, what exactly? A millionaire? Someone whose pet had been sitting on a cryptocurrency fortune for years while I stressed about credit card payments? Benjamin Franklin once said, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." Grandma Ellen had invested in Rudy's memory, and it had just paid interest that would make Warren Buffett jealous. Before I even breathed, I created a brand new seed phrase, stored it offline, and moved most of the funds to cold storage. Grandma's setup was clever, but I wasn't going to bet $43 million on the memory of a bird with a taste for peanut butter. Then I sat there for about an hour, just staring at my new wallet balance, waiting for someone to knock on my door and tell me there had been a mistake. But the numbers stayed there, stubborn as my grandmother had been, refusing to budge. The first real test came when I decided to cash out a small amount. I spent 3 days researching exchanges, reading about KYC requirements, and understanding the legal implications of suddenly having this much money. The last thing I wanted was to accidentally trigger some government investigation or lose everything to a hack. I chose Coinbase Pro, uploaded my ID, went through their verification process, and held my breath for 3 days while they approved my account. Even for just 5 Bitcoin, they wanted documentation, proof of funds, the whole 9 yards. When the approval finally came through, I transferred exactly 5 Bitcoin and converted them to cash. $560,000. More money than I'd made in the past 5 years combined, and it was just a tiny slice of what Rudy had been guarding. The money hit my bank account on a Friday afternoon. I remember sitting in my car outside the bank, staring at my phone, looking at a balance that had 6 figures where it used to have 3. I actually called the bank to make sure it wasn't an error. "Yes, sir. The wire transfer cleared successfully," the customer service representative confirmed, her voice professionally cheerful. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" What do you say to that? Yeah, I just found out my Parrot was a cryptocurrency custodian, and I'm having an existential crisis. Instead, I just thanked her and hung up. The first thing I did with that money was pay off my mortgage. I'd been carrying that debt for 12 years, making payments that felt like they'd never end. Walking into the bank and writing a check for the full balance was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. The loan officer looked confused when I handed her a cashier's check for $347,000. "You're paying off the entire remaining balance?" I nodded, trying to act like this was a normal Tuesday afternoon activity. Came into some money. Investment paid off. She didn't ask questions, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. For the first time in years, I could breathe. No more mortgage payments. No more lying awake at night wondering how I'd make ends meet. The weight I'd been carrying on my shoulder for months just disappeared. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Inspiration. I'd always dreamed of starting my own accounting practice, but I'd never had the capital or the courage to take the leap. Now I had both. That's how Parrot Ledger Accounting was born. I named it partly as a tribute to Rudy, but mostly because I wanted to remember that financial freedom can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the best investments are the ones that don't look like investments at all. I rented a small office space downtown, hired my first employee, and started building something that was actually mine, not a job where I could be optimized out whenever some executive decided to cut costs. My business, my rules, my future. As I was setting up the business, pieces of Grandma Ellen's master plan started falling into place. I remembered conversations from years ago that I dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman who watched too much news. Flashback to 2013. I was visiting for Thanksgiving, and Grandma Ellen was sitting at her ancient desktop computer, squinting at the screen with the intensity of someone trying to solve a crossword puzzle. "Kevin, come look at this," she'd said. "They're calling it Bitcoin, digital money that no government can control." I barely glanced at the screen. Like most people back then, I thought cryptocurrency was either a scam or some weird tech fad that would disappear in a few months. Sounds complicated. Grandma, stick to your savings account. She'd given me that look she reserved for when I was being particularly dense. Complicated doesn't mean wrong, Kevin. Sometimes complicated is just another word for innovative. But I was young and arrogant and convinced that I knew better than an old woman who still used Internet Explorer. I wish I could go back and actually listen to what she was trying to tell me. Now I understood her brilliance. Grandma didn't trust banks or tech, but she trusted Rudy, a creature who couldn't crash, couldn't forget, and couldn't be hacked. She'd turned him into the world's most unusual cold storage device, complete with feathers and attitude. It was brilliant in its simplicity. She'd trained him using positive reinforcement, the same way you teach any parrot to talk. But instead of teaching him to say hello or mimic telephone rings, she'd taught him to memorize a fortune. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this was classic Grandma Ellen. She loved puzzles, riddles, and elaborate practical jokes. This was her masterpiece, a treasure hunt that required patience, observation, and trust in the most unlikely guardian imaginable. Business was picking up faster than I'd expected. Word spreads quickly in a small town when someone opened a new practice, and it spreads even faster when that someone has apparently come into money overnight. But success brought attention I wasn't prepared for. And in small towns, Attention leads to questions. Questions I wasn't sure how to answer. The first call came on a Wednesday morning in September. I was reviewing a client's quarterly reports when my phone rang. Tom's name appeared on the screen, and something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a friendly check-in. "Kevin, it's Tom. We need to talk." His voice had that edge it gets when he's trying to sound casual, but failing. "Sure, what's up?" "Where'd you get the money for the business?" There it was, the question I'd been dreading. I could have told him the truth, but who would believe that a parrot had been guarding a cryptocurrency fortune for over a decade? Instead, I went with a version that was technically accurate, but missing some key details. Inheritance money, Tom. Some investments Grandma Ellen had that I didn't know about. The silence on the other end stretched long enough to make me uncomfortable. When Tom finally spoke, his voice was different, suspicious, calculating. "That's funny, Kevin, because Belinda and I went through all of Grandma's financial records with the lawyer. We found her savings account, her CDs, her stock portfolio. Everything was accounted for and distributed according to the will. So where exactly did this mystery inheritance come from?" My mouth went dry. I should have anticipated this. Tom had always been thorough, and he'd never been one to let details slide, especially when those details involved money he thought should have been his. I tried to buy time, but Tom wasn't letting me off the hook. "Look, Kevin, I don't know what game you're playing, but if you found something that should have been part of the estate, we have a right to know about it." Then came the word that made my blood run cold. "Belinda and I are prepared to take legal action if necessary. We've already talked to Henderson about our options." Legal action. They'd already talked to the lawyer. This wasn't just suspicious family curiosity anymore. This was a coordinated attack. I managed to get off the phone without revealing anything, but the damage was done. Tom suspected something, and when Tom suspected something, he didn't let it go. I looked at Rudy, who was sitting on his perch, casually cleaning his feathers like he didn't have a care in the world. "Well, buddy, looks like our secret is starting to attract the wrong kind of attention." He looked at me with that intelligent expression he gets sometimes and clearly said victory. But this time, it didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded like a warning. The peaceful phase of my inheritance windfall was officially over. Tom's suspicion meant questions. Questions meant investigations. And investigations meant that very soon, the whole world might know about the parrot who'd been sitting on a fortune while his family fought over table scraps. I thought finding the money was the hard part. I was about to learn that keeping it would be even harder, especially when your own family starts looking at you like you've stolen something that belongs to them. But that's a story for the next chapter, because right now, sitting in my new office, looking at my successful business and my secure future, I can tell you one thing. Wealth changes everything, including the people who think they deserve a piece of it. I thought the puzzle was over. But in small towns, secrets don't stay buried long, especially not when your brother's coming for your bird, your wallet, and your sanity. The next phase of this adventure was about to begin, and I had a feeling the judge wouldn't care how smart my parrot was, only whether I stole from this state. 3 weeks after Tom's threatening phone call, I was sitting across from my lawyer, Marcus Rodriguez, holding a legal document that made my blood run cold. Tom and Belinda had officially filed suit, demanding 2/3 of what they called misappropriated estate assets. Their argument? The ledger device had been physically located in Grandma's house, making it part of the estate that should have been divided equally. I almost laughed at the absurdity. "So, let me get this straight, Marcus. A hardware wallet that's worth about $50 without the password suddenly becomes the crown jewel of the inheritance because it was sitting in a wooden stand." Marcus, a guy who'd seen every type of family dispute imaginable, just shook his head. "Kevin, the law loves technicalities, and your siblings have found themselves a doozy." The person representing Tom and Belinda was none other than Mr. Henderson, the same lawyer who'd read Grandma's will. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd handed me those keys was now trying to take away what I'd found with them. But what hit me hardest wasn't the legal betrayal. It was a personal one. When Marcus showed me the photos attached to their filing, Tom and Belinda's stern faces staring back at me from official court documents, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I remembered Tom from 2003, back when he was just my big brother who actually cared about teaching me things. I bought this beat-up Toyota Corolla, and Tom spent an entire Saturday showing me how to change the oil. We were both covered in grease, laughing at my attempts to unscrew the drain plug. "You getting this, little brother?" he'd asked, wiping his hands on an old rag. Genuinely wanted to make sure I understood. And Belinda? She'd been my protector, growing up. When Dad would get mad about my grades or my messy room, she'd step in and redirect his anger. I still remember her teaching me to dance before my high school prom, both of us stepping on each other's feet and cracking up. We'd been a family once, real siblings who looked out for each other. Now, 20 years later, we were adversaries in a courtroom, and their faces in those legal photos looked like strangers. It was bitter in a way that no amount of money could sweeten. The hearing was scheduled for July 10th. Marcus had 3 days to prepare what he called the most unusual inheritance defense he'd ever attempted. "Here's our strategy, Kevin. The ledger device is just plastic and metal, worthless without the access key. But the seed phrase only existed in Rudy's memory. It wasn't a documented asset until you actually recovered it. We're going to argue that this was knowledge, not property." He pulled out a thick folder. "There's precedent. In the state of Serrano case, a digital encryption key was ruled to be intangible knowledge rather than inheritable property. The court said you can't inherit what you don't know exists." I like that angle. "So what you're saying is you can't steal something that was never officially there to begin with." "Exactly. Plus, who in that courtroom actually learned those 24 words from a parrot? You or your siblings?" Marcus was building something beautiful. Grandma Ellen, like a true philosopher, had forced us all to confront a fundamental question. Can you own something that has no physical form? But here's where the story gets really interesting. Word of our case leaked to the media, and apparently man inherits fortune from talking parrot was too good for news outlets to ignore. The media pounced. CNBC, CNN, even the Wall Street Journal covered the story. Apparently, Parrot unlocks crypto fortune was just too good to ignore. Within days, I was getting calls from reporters, podcast hosts, and social media influencers. Everyone wanted to meet the bird who'd been sitting on a $43 million secret. That's when I made what turned out to be a brilliant decision. I created a TikTok account called it Parrot Wallet and started posting videos of Rudy just being himself, a sarcastic, intelligent bird who occasionally dropped financial terminology into casual conversation. The first video got 50,000 views in an hour. By the end of the week, we had 3.4 million followers. People couldn't get enough of watching Rudy randomly say words like fortune, victory, and chocolate while preening his feathers or cracking sunflower seeds. Rudy seemed to love the attention. During filming, he'd pose to the camera, show off his vocabulary, and generally act like he understood he was famous. One video of him saying Bitcoin while eating a cracker got 8 million views in 2 days. Grandma Ellen used to say, "Laughter is the best medicine," and I could see people all over the world laughing with us about this incredible story. Comments poured in from everywhere. People sharing their own inheritance stories, debating the ethics of our situation, and just enjoying the absurdity of it all. The hearing arrived faster than I wanted it to. July 10th, 2025, in the Superior Court of our county. The courtroom was packed, not just with family and lawyers, but with reporters and curious locals who'd been following the story. Judge Patricia Williams, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen everything twice, called the court to order. This is certainly the most unusual estate dispute I presided over in 30 years on the bench. Henderson stood up first, representing Tom and Belinda. His argument was straightforward. The ledger device was physically present in the house, making it part of the estate. The fact that it contained valuable assets was irrelevant. It should have been distributed according to the will. "Your Honor," Henderson argued, "the device in question was clearly part of the deceased's personal property. The cryptocurrency stored on it represents assets that should have been included in the estate valuation. Mr. Kevin Thompson has essentially stolen from his siblings." I felt my face get hot when he said stolen. That word stung more than I expected. Then Marcus stood up, and I remembered why I'd hired him. "Your Honor, Opposing counsel is asking this court to redefine the very nature of inheritance. A hardware wallet without its access code is no different from a safe without its combination. It's an empty container. The seed phrase that unlocked these assets existed solely in the memory of a pet that was specifically bequeathed to my client. This wasn't hidden property. It was knowledge that required patience, observation, and effort to obtain. Knowledge that no one else in this courtroom possessed or attempted to acquire. Marcus was hitting his stride. We're not talking about a treasure map left in a drawer. We're talking about information that lived in the mind of an animal, accessible only to someone willing to invest the time to understand that animal's behavior. The judge looked intrigued. Are you arguing that the cryptocurrency didn't exist as inheritable property until Mr. Thompson actually accessed it? That's exactly what I'm arguing, Your Honor. The seed phrase was knowledge, not property, and knowledge belongs to whoever acquires it legitimately. Henderson tried to counter. The decedent clearly intended for this wealth to be part of this estate. She just chose an unusual storage method. If that were true, Marcus shot back, why didn't she leave instructions? Why didn't she tell anyone what she'd done? Ellen Thompson was a woman who believed in earning what you receive. She left my client a puzzle, not an inheritance. The philosophical nature of the debate wasn't lost on anyone in that courtroom. Judge Williams even smiled slightly when Marcus asked, Your Honor, if wisdom can't be inherited, only earned, why should the knowledge to access digital assets be any different? After a brief recess, Judge Williams returned with her decision. The courtroom went silent. This case has forced me to consider questions I never expected to address in my career. After reviewing the precedents, particularly in Ria State of Serrano, and considering the unique circumstances of this case, I find that the cryptocurrency assets in question were not accessible property until Mr. Thompson successfully retrieved the access information. The court rules in favor of the defendant. Mr. Kevin Thompson has full legal right to the cryptocurrency assets. Tom and Belinda sat like stones. I'd won. They were getting exactly $0 for what they'd tried to claim. But looking at their faces, the disappointment, the anger, the sense of betrayal they probably felt, I realized that winning didn't have to mean they lost everything. Grandma Ellen had taught me to be generous. She'd always said, real wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give away. Standing there in that courtroom, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement. Judge Williams nodded. I know my grandmother would want me to take care of family, even when family doesn't take care of me. I'm voluntarily giving my brother and sister 50 Ethereum each as a gesture of goodwill. At current prices, that was about $130,000 each. Not exactly chump change, but a fraction of what they tried to claim. The judge looked surprised. Henderson looked confused. Tom and Belinda looked. Well, they looked like people who'd just been handed more money than they'd expected to see that day. Marcus whispered, Are you sure? And I nodded. Sometimes the best victory is the one that doesn't leave bodies on a battlefield. But here's where the story takes another interesting turn. Within an hour of leaving the courthouse, my phone started buzzing with text messages from my newly generous siblings. Tom texted, Let's grab coffee, maybe explore business ideas. Belinda followed with NFT idea incoming with a brain and money emoji. I stared at the screen. 20 minutes ago, they were suing me. Now they wanted collaborations. Wow, Rudy, I said to the bird carrier in my back seat. Look how fast people change when money's involved. Rudy tilted his head and clearly said victory. But this time, it sounded less like celebration and more like a warning. I drove home thinking about Grandma Ellen's final lesson. She hadn't just taught me about cryptocurrency or the importance of unexpected teachers. She'd show me something much more valuable. People will reveal their true character when money is involved. And sometimes the people you trust most are the ones you should trust least. The question now was whether to let Tom and Belinda back into my life, or whether I'd learned enough about their character to keep my distance. Because I had a feeling that their newfound interest in being my partner had a lot more to do with my bank account than my brotherhood. But that decision would have to wait. Right now, I had a different kind of inheritance to think about. Not the kind that comes in Bitcoin, but the kind that comes in wisdom, values, and the responsibility to do something meaningful with unexpected good fortune. 3 days later, I was sitting in my office when the answer came to me. I wasn't going to launch an NFT collection or partner with Tom and Belinda on get-rich-quick schemes. I was going to do something that would make Grandma Ellen proud. I was going to create a legacy that actually mattered. That's how Ellen's Nest was born, a 501c3 nonprofit foundation dedicated to teaching digital literacy and cybersecurity to seniors. I committed $5 million to the project, figuring that if my grandmother could learn to use cryptocurrency in her 70s, other seniors could learn to protect themselves online too. The foundation's motto? Protect what you know. It seemed fitting. I kept 250 Bitcoin in cold storage, invested the rest in diversified index funds, and started building something that would outlast any family squabble or market crash. Security, knowledge, purpose. That became my new trinity. On a warm afternoon in early July, just a few days ago, we opened Ellen's Nest. Tom and Belinda were in the front row, all smiles and public support. They pivoted from trying to steal my inheritance to wanting to be associated with my philanthropy. The speed of their transformation would have been impressive if it wasn't so transparently calculated. I was at the podium, giving my opening remarks, when Rudy, who was perched on my shoulder for the occasion, decided to contribute to the speech. Right in the middle of my thank you to all the supporters, he looked directly into the microphone and clearly recited the entire original seed phrase. Friendship, garden, mountain, river, apple, house, ocean, fortune, liberty, kitchen, surprise, comfort, chocolate, water, victory. The audience erupted in laughter and applause. I grinned and patted Rudy's head. Easy there, buddy. We already changed that password. The laughter got even louder, but the message was clear. Knowledge belongs to those who protect it, and to those who understand its true value, not just its price. It was Rudy's final lesson, delivered with perfect timing and a healthy dose of sass. As I stood there by the foundation sign, Ellen's Nest, protecting digital wisdom for tomorrow's seniors, holding Rudy and looking out the crowd, I realized something profound. This story was never really about money. It was about legacy, wisdom, and the unexpected places where life's most valuable lessons hide. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't buried in the ground or locked in vaults. Sometimes they're sitting right in front of you, in the memory of a sarcastic parrot who knew more about wealth than most financial advisors ever will. My life changed because of a grandmother, a parrot, and 24 words. But more than that, it changed because I learned that real inheritance isn't what you receive. It's what you choose to do with what you're given. If you're watching this, maybe you've got your own hidden seed phrases waiting to be discovered. Maybe they're not in cryptocurrency, but in the wisdom of the people who came before you, the lessons hiding in plain sight, or the opportunities you've been too busy to notice. Remember, true wealth isn't what you have in your wallet. It's who you become and what you do with whatever life hands you, whether that's $43 million or just a memory of someone who believed you were worth more than you believed yourself. Keep your eyes open. Protect what you know. And never underestimate the intelligence of a bird with an attitude and a really, really good memory. Until next time, this is Kevin and Rudy, signing off from the strangest inheritance story you'll probably ever hear. Thanks for listening, and may your own unexpected teacher's behalf, as wise as mine turn out to be,